From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone didn't have too big a lunch. This afternoon, we've got a really great program for you, mostly focused on the Carta Marina and nautical charts. Obviously, the Carta Marina is itself a large printed nautical chart, very different from the 1507 map, and to a certain extent, it is somewhat the understudied sister of the 1507 map, which has its own little nickname, the Birth Certificate of America, and various other sundry theories associated with it. The Carta Marina seems to have been largely ignored, except for a few people who've actually done very intensive work on it. Our first speaker today, this afternoon, Joachim Gaspar, is one of those scholars who not only does intensive and deep scholarship, but one of those scholars who transform a discipline, transform the study of a particular type of object. Joachim, whose dissertation committee I was on when he received his doctorate, I'm not being one-sided here, but it was a very good defense, basically has begun to apply very analytical tools to some of the interesting technical questions associated with not only things like Portolan charts, but also mysteries like the Mercator projection. How was it mathematically constructed? He's done a lot of work and published in many essays and in Imago Mundi and several other journals. If you've never read his dissertation on Portolan charts, I would suggest it is required reading. He has just recently received one of the first millionary research grant from the European Research Council in the history of cartography since the European Research Council was founded to study the technical developments of the Portolan chart. And so without further ado, Joachim.
Thank you very much. Before I start, let me just say how honored and I feel to be here, and I have to thank John for inviting me. Well, the title is not exactly the same as in the program. Anyway, I promise you that it will be equally exciting. Can you hear me? Not too loud? No, okay. I would like to start my talk by showing side by side two different kinds of modern maps depicting the same region of the world, the well-known Chesapeake Bay. A nautical chart on the left and a topographical map on the right. The differences are obvious. In the topographical map, the information is concentrated inland, leaving the wet areas almost totally empty. In the nautical chart, most of the information is located at sea and in the coastal areas closest to the sea, leaving the dry land virtually blank. The reasons for these differences are, of course, related to the different purposes of maps and charts. While topographical maps are intended to depict all kinds of general information relative to the surface of the Earth, nautical charts are constructed with the specific goal of supporting marine navigation. But of course, these are old news for those of you who are acquainted with maps and charts. However, when we look into the historical evolution of nautical cartography, we realize that the differences between these two types of representations are much more profound than expected. That is the subject of my presentation today. I will show, using examples taken from various periods, that historically maps and nautical charts not only had different geneses, but also were constructed with different purposes and according to different principles. The fundamental difference between maps and charts was, in a limited way, already expressed by the late American cartographer Arthur Robinson, who stated in his well-known book Elements of Cartography, and I quote, "Maps are to be looked at while charts are to be worked on." Although Robinson's definition is wonderfully expressive and synthetic, it doesn't tell the whole story or even the most exciting parts. In my talk, I will show how closely connected are the geometry and the construction processes of nautical charts throughout history to the navigational methods they were intended to support, and how the confusion between what should be considered as an accurate map and an accurate chart often led to misunderstanding and conflict between pilots, cartographers, and cosmographers. Only in the present day can we see more clearly through the mist caused by some subtle technical questions that the protagonists of the past were unable to interpret, and fully understand the reason for those misunderstandings, which is the intrinsically different nature of maps and charts. Can we see more clearly through the mist caused by some subtle technical questions that the protagonists of the past were unable to interpret, and fully understand the reason for those misunderstandings, which is the intrinsically different nature of maps and charts. On Earth, we realize that the north-south direction in the old chart, as defined by its vertical top-down lines, is tilted counterclockwise by an angle close to 10 degrees. Why is that? How could the cartographers of the 14th century make such a mistake when they were perfectly aware that the direction of the geographical north could be easily determined by observing the pole star? In the beginning of the 15th century...
Redem had a question for Gaspar. Mr. Gaspar, how do you reconcile when you go all the way around Africa and you land then in the Red Sea, which is beautifully colored red? The Portuguese made this entry so that you have this distortion. You refer to the declination of the magnetic needle. However, when the Portuguese make it into the Gulf of Suez, or into the area of Suez, and depicting it then on the map far distorted to the east, however, knowing that Alexandria, Akko, and other places in the Mediterranean are far more west, didn't they discover that on a short distance, which was known to them already in the time, that it couldn't be such a long stretch? Or didn't it occur to them? I'm just curious.
Sorry.
Question is...
You have the microphone too close to your mouth. I couldn't understand the words, I'm sorry.
Okay, short version is, the Red Sea was navigated by the Portuguese as well. Can you hear me now better? Okay, it's now better? Now better? Okay. Just tell me how should I hold it. Okay, the question is, when the Portuguese are in the Red Sea, defining Suez or defining Aqaba, places like this, which were already known about where the relative position is to the Mediterranean, and when you have a distortion over an, in reality, short distance, but on the map, a very wide distance. Did anybody notice that this can't be? Sorry.
Okay, of course they knew. They were distorted. They knew in the Mediterranean. They knew how to determine exactly the direction of the north, the direction of the pole. And I talked a little bit about that, not only before the translation of Ptolemy's geography. They already knew where the north is, but after Ptolemy's geography, they had to have a very strong reason to defy the authority of the classics and maintain the Mediterranean tilted. And the very strong reason was navigation. So only in the end of the 17th century was the tilt of the Mediterranean corrected. That one thing. Yes, they knew, maybe they didn't know the reason, but they knew it was distorted. They knew it was tilted. The same thing for Africa, not only for the stretching and the distortions of the coastlines, but also for the mismatch between Africa and the Mediterranean. Of course, the Isthmus of Suez was enormous, but those charts were intended not to depict the world, not to depict the land masses, but to navigate. Yeah. So the orientation of the coastline had to match the orientation of the compass course.
Right. I think what is unique in some ways about Joachim's work, and maybe this isn't coming out clearly, is Joachim has basically put forth an instrumental theory of the Portolan chart. In other words, you can't look at the Portolan chart like it's a geographic map. If you look at a Portolan chart, you've got to realize what the technology of navigation was. This was supporting the technology of navigation. So it doesn't matter how the chart looks. It could look totally baffling to us as far as accuracy and distances, but when then you took it and you used it with the tools that were available for navigation, it worked as a diagram. And all of these things have to be brought together into the discussion of what is principally a non-geographic instrument. And that really is the difference in his work. He has taken this out of the history of cartography and put it where it should be, into the history of navigation and technology. And so all of those old philological tools, what the shape of the coastline was, all that kind of stuff, are very immaterial to these charts when you put them in the context of navigation. And that's the departure, and that really is the central, when you look at Joachim's very technical work and he backs this up with his mathematics, it is 100% convincing that to a certain extent we have been looking at these things in very primitive ways for very long. And so you can't throw out all of the philological and toponym work, but really this technical instrumental thing has kind of revolutionized the study of what a Portolan chart is. And I think you had a question. Okay.
Okay, let me just,
Go ahead.
I couldn't say it better. Well, but this is not an easy question. The way charts were constructed, it's not easy, it's not immediate. It's not by chance that the historians didn't reach the right explanation before the present day, because it's a subtle technical questions. You got to know about navigation, about theoretical cartography, and about history, of course.
And by the way, Joachim, before he got his PhD, was a naval navigator in the Portuguese Navy, so hence. The microphone. Grab the microphone.
Related to that question, and because I'm not technical, I can't answer this, but if they got to the same location in Egypt or in that general area by going through the Mediterranean and also by navigating around Africa, are the errors offsetting in that, or would they actually get two different locations for the same point?
That is an excellent question. Thank you. Well, they would get different things, of course. They got different things, as a matter of fact, because the eastern side of the Mediterranean didn't match the tip of the Red Sea, didn't match the Isthmus of Suez. Firstly, because of magnetic inclination, but not only because there is another problem, is even a more subtle problem, which is the fact that the Earth is round, and they didn't consider the roundness of the Earth. So everything you put on the plane, every measurement you made in the spherical Earth and put on the plane is geometrically inconsistent. And the final position of some port depends on the way you use to plot that port on the chart. Did I answer to your question?
And one last question.